Well, good to have you with us here on the Thursday edition of the South African Morning. Our lockdowns don't seem to work in Africa as a first response to a pandemic. Now, during better times, countries can change their measures. We're going to talk about what those measures are. And that's according to research that has now come out from the University of Johannesburg. Let's speak to from the university, Professor Nicholas Ngepa, joining us for this. Professor, good morning to you. I don't want to tell our viewers everything about your research, so perhaps you can tell me why lockdowns don't seem to work in Africa as a response. It's quite a statement to make. Good morning.
Thank you for having me on your show. One of the things that can be very bad for a nation that is surprised by a pandemic is poverty and inequality, particularly for the imposition of regulations like lockdown. And what we have come to know is that in very poor countries where inequality is also very high, like South Africa, once you impose lockdowns, it doesn't take a long time for the individuals, the citizens, to start to circumvent the lockdowns because they don't have any alternative. They don't have anywhere to go. And particularly for South Africa, inequality is a particular problem because the poor are also disgruntled that there are some parts of the society who seem to be doing well. For example, when the lockdown was imposed early on, before the lockdown came into effect, some of the shops in the urban centers were nearly empty because those who had the means were able to empty the shops. But the poor people don't have that means to empty the shops. The moment you impose lockdowns, then you are just constraining them without alternatives, and they would not be able to obey lockdowns. They might seem to obey, but they will always find a way of sneaking around and doing whatever they have to do.
So what's the alternative to this then, Prof? What's the suggested alternative to lockdowns in Africa, which, as we're discussing, doesn't seem to work?
Well, the first thing, there will be short-term immediate measures. There are long-term measures too. The first thing is the ability for the government to be proactive when a pandemic is arriving. If we look at when the pandemic was about to open up, when it was just being announced in other countries, then it even entered South Africa. What we found is that the first thing to do is to manage the international borders effectively and immediately. If you look at countries like Mauritius, and you look at China itself, when the whole thing started in China, but in less than no time, China was the one supporting other countries. The way it managed the countries with population dynamics. So the first thing is international movements to control for that. Another example is Mauritius in the timing of the international movement. The moment you are able to delay entry into the country of the first cases, then you can have enough room to plan for lockdown by looking at what the poor needs. In the long term, the measures are around the economic health of the citizens. What alternatives do the citizens have to be able to survive during lockdown? Yes, the government put measures of 350 rand for the poor in place during lockdowns, but poverty line is 585 rand, and that is the food poverty line, which means it's the minimum amount you need in order to get food to eat.
Yeah, Professor, help me
even below that.
Professor, help me understand as well. Professor, let me come in, forgive me. Just before I have to let you go this morning, so we're talking about this from an economic perspective, of course, and I think we all know the devastating effects of that. And obviously, I think many will agree that economic lockdown is always going to be damaging, even being able to see that down the road. But there's going to be arguments of the health perspective of this as well. Just in the last minute or so I have with you, Prof, help me understand the balance between the health elements of this and the economic elements of this.
Yes. If you want to save economics and save lives at the same time, you need to plan ahead of time. You need to put measures in place. You have to make sure that the other socioeconomic variables that are complementary to the health system are strongly put in place. For example, your quality of services. In the poorer neighborhoods, they must have effective services. Sanitation, but particularly, was found to be the most effective weapon against the spread. And the sanitation infrastructures in many poor neighborhoods were lacking in most African countries, particularly also in South Africa. So in balancing that, it's not a matter of taking action when the pandemic has arrived. It's a matter of what you've been doing when there was no pandemic with your population.
And perhaps in the last 30 seconds, Prof, that's the argument, is in the last 30 seconds that I have with you. Some people are arguing that these kind of structures and plans that you're suggesting weren't in place even before COVID-19. So we were on a highway to a hiding before the pandemic already, weren't we? 30 seconds is yours and your response.
Well, we all know that the basic sanitation infrastructures in South Africa and in poorer African countries are very low. You understand why African leaders, including some of our leaders, seek medical help out of their country because they know that the infrastructure, they don't trust the infrastructure that they have in place. So these infrastructures, we cannot really say that it was reliably in place. They had serious gaps, significant gaps. Look at the water system among the poor municipalities in South Africa, for example. You would know that we were not prepared in terms of infrastructure. Well, we should distinguish between the infrastructure in South Africa that serves the rich and the infrastructure in South Africa that serves the poor. I'm talking about proper infrastructure. Yeah. It is not really adequate to be able to cater for the poor during pandemics.
No, it's not. It wasn't in place either to cater for the poor before the pandemic either as well. High-profile South Africans going overseas, as you say, to look for health. I wonder where the Deputy President is, by the way.